Hi, good morning. It's actually a late afternoon. Uh, this is Vaughan at Westcote Bell Pottery. I'm been asked if somebody wants to know how to make vases. So I'm going to throw a bunch of small bud vases, and we can do a video on larger vases later on. Pretty much, you got those big urns are still on the table behind me. I mean, vases, they could be used as vases. So these are going to be 1 pound of clay, 460 grams, I think that is, and it's in B mix, which is from Laguna Clay Company. It's actually my favorite clay for using. You know, it pulls really well. And I'm going to be throwing on a Shimpo Whisper. So let's get you positioned so you can see really well. Okay, if you're a beginner, you should make these into balls of clay, by the way, because I can squish down really hard. Oh, look at that. That's perfect. About as close as you can get. Okay, so press down equally with both hands. This isn't a beginner video, but I'll talk through it because I always feel like that helps with people. Even people who know how to throw, it's nice to know how somebody else does it. So I'm pushing in from the side and then down with the top hand to sort of get a feel for the clay. And now I'm centering. So my left hand is resting on the plasti bat, which burns just there if you're not careful. And then feel for the center of the clay until you feel like you've got it, and then you push down and fill it full of water if you want. That'll give you a little help. But then push down and leave a centimeter or so at the bottom and pull out, not too far if you're making a vase. And then I'm just compressing the bottom a little bit right in the center there with my finger pushing right down to flatten it, so I don't have there's no little nipple sticking up. It's just a flat bottom. Now this is how you did that part of it, but when you're going to catch the clay with your fingernails, you should move over here for doing all the pull work. So outside fingers, inside fingers pushing back just a tiny bit, but mostly from the outside fingers you pull up. Now there's the position of my fingers. So this finger is directly down, and these fingers are pushing against it right there. These fingers are pushing at an angle of 45 degrees. We talked about that in the other video. So 45 degrees. So not directly on top of each other, but at an angle like that. And then make sure the clay is wet again. So push in with the outside fingers and start pulling up. So the inside fingers are still vertical, and the outside fingers are at 45 degrees, with all the pressure coming from the outside. See, there's the clay smudged right on my finger, and there's the clay on those fingers. There's a lot of clay. Then dribble right on the rim, all the way down. Now you've got to get your hand in, so there's no way around this. You can use a throwing stick, but you could always collar it again later. But push in deep again, because I'm trying to get a narrow bottom with a belly vase. Actually, maybe we should just stick with the simple shape first. Because that's a vase already. But I also make that as a drinking glass. I'd always press down on the rim. Then I'm going to have to change the camera a bit because we're going off the lens. So dribble the water right on the rim and it goes inside and outside. Hand goes in again. And now I'm going to push with my inside fingers a little bit to widen it. And then I'm going to stop pushing on the inside I'm going to push on the outside to push it in a little bit. And before I get it too closed, I'm going to get the water out of the inside. And always drag the sponge up all the way in case you've got any lumps of clay stuck to the wall on the way down. Then at this point, very gently collar it a touch. Now, as many points of contact as possible with your fingers. So I got 6 points. That point, that point, that point, that point, and the same on this hand. And I can't dribble water on the inside because I dried it out already. So I'm going to do the same again. 6 points of contact. To narrow it in, take a look. I'm going to make sure you don't get any wobbles. At this point you can drag the water off the outside down there. That'll stop it from softening too much. And then 6 points of contact again at the neck. And we're narrowing it. So now I'm going to do a little pull to kind of even the clay, because when you do that collaring you often get little ripples in the clay. So it's a good idea to sort of even up the wall a little bit. And you can do that as many times as you think you can get away with. Now before it gets too narrow, I have a throwing stick here, which is covered in clay. So make sure you got no dry clay on it anywhere. This is what we call the throwing stick. So it enables you to go in. You don't want to drop too much water inside here. And using the tip of the curve, you can belly out a little bit on the inside. And just pull it up just as if you were throwing with your fingers. And you can widen it just a touch to make that belly a little nicer curve. There you go. And they make those throwing sticks out of various different sizes and such. Let's get a little water on this outside bit because I can go narrower on this still. So I'm just wetting that upper part. And then I'm going to do the 6 point of contact again. Narrow it again. Now I've got 5 points of contact. I pull one finger back because it's getting a narrow space, narrow circumference, so I don't need to be touching as many points. Now I've only got 4 points touching. Take a look again, you make sure there's no wobbles. Now I'm going to do that little pull again. It's a bit dry on the inside, so I've got to wet my finger. And then I can do a little pull on the neck. Don't want to thin it too much because I might be able to get some extra height there. I'm going to check the belly to make sure we aren't getting any wobbles. Pull the rib up there. Oh, it feels good. I'm wetting my finger again to start and get some water down in that neck area. It's a bit dry on the outside too, so you've got to make sure you do not have any pull at this point where the clay sticks to your finger, because it will pull it off center. So let's do another little collar. Alright, so we're really getting a narrow bud vase, because you only need one flower in a bud vase. And it's just too narrow for my fingers, so I've got to now just do a little pull. My finger will go a little deeper. As long as I've got it slimy so it's slippery. I didn't need to go back and get more water, but I will now. So just the narrow neck, I don't want to soften the area in the middle there, but I want my finger wet so I can go down a bit. And I'm going to do one more pull. You could make this even narrower, but functionally you've got to get a stem of a flower in there. I mean, you can close this right up, but a vase needs to be wide enough to get the flower in, even if it's just one thin rose. And use your rib, metal rib, to kind of, once again, to refine the shape. Just drags a little clay off. Take a look at your belly and kind of make that curve. It depends on what you're looking for too, remember. You may not want to get what I'm getting here. I can just pull one more little thing up here, using my little finger, as little contact as possible. There's still a little thickness right on the rim, so I can play with it. Once you get it thin, you can't. Then I can start playing around and putting some decorative elements into the form. Just little grooves that the clay will, stick through the glaze a little bit. Okay, we have a vase or a vase. I don't know which one it is. I grew up in England, I've lived in the States, and now I'm in Canada. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. It's a boot, it's a trunk, it's a gas can, it's a petrol can. Everything is mixed up. Alright, so what do? We've got a nice top. We don't have to leave it that shape. I'm going to get the water off it. Rib with my finger, just pushing against it, and we can flare that out just a little bit more. Just makes it a little more elegant. I think that's okay. Get your wire. This should come off really easy. I left a nice thick area at the bottom. Okay, so Okay, one of the hardest things to do when you're throwing a tall form like a bottle is to collar. So I'm going to do a little thing on collaring here. So move the clay around, make sure it's nice and even. Go for center. And then find your little hole in the center. Come out. Remembering it's a bottle form, so it's narrow. Do your first pull, making sure you press harder on the outside. Stay for the sweet spot, so you've got to chase the water up the wall. Chase the water up the wall again. Try not to dry it with your left hand fingers on the outside. I try to keep my fingers all connected so that everything knows what everything else is doing. Now it has to go wider because your hand has to go inside. Try not to narrow or thin the wall at the bottom too much because you need some thickness down there to hold the piece. Once again, to get down there, I have to put my hand inside, so that means make sure your hand is thoroughly wet. And now I'm going to basically go for my final form at the bottom. Which is kind of a cylinder to about just over halfway. And I'm going to use my rib inside just to push out the very bottom because it's a bit narrower at the bottom there. Come just up to there, hold it for a second, get my wooden rib, try and press against the wooden rib to get that cylinder look because I'm making a bottle. Okay, so that's my bottom of the bottle done. So I can actually take the water out now at the bottom. And I'm going to pull the sponge all the way up so that it's making sure that the wall is evenly moist all the way up. And now, basically, we have a form that I want to make into a bottle, so I've got to collar. So I'm going to make sure that the wall is wet there. And I'm going to use these fingers like this, and then these two fingers are going to be in there too, trying to press, so we've got 6 points of contact. So find the part where it's still smooth and slippery and start your 6 points of contact, and you're trying to collar up, staying on the sweet spot, the wet area, right to the top. Alright, so we've got that. Wet it again. Now this time I'm going to try as far down as I can reach. Is it still wet? I can get a little bit of water down there on the wall. I'm going to try and pull the wall up a little higher, but just from the point where as far as my finger can reach basically, and do a pull to get a bit more height. See, I didn't get my hand all the way in, so I didn't widen it. Now I'm going to use the rib again to make sure, because the bottom started to bend out a bit. You don't want to buckle down the bottom there. That's why we dried it out. There's still some water in there. I'm going to get it out. Some dribbled off the sponge as I wet the inside wall a bit. I want to keep it as dry as possible down there. Okay, so now I got a bit more height, so I'm going to wet the outside again with the sponge to water it. Feel it, just to get a bit more water. You got to make sure that is totally wet. Okay, and then you're going to wet your fingers a bit. 6 points of contact again from the halfway point, pulling up, staying on the sweet spot. See, it's getting narrow. Now I'm going to wet it again. Six points of contact. As long as its circumference is big enough, you can get all 6 fingers in there touching. So I'm going to leave my fingers in this position so you can see if I can turn my body enough. That's what I've got. So I've got the 6 points of contact. Alright, so now I'm going to do a little bit of a pull. So once again, wet the area, and I'm going to do a little bit more of a pull, get a bit more height. Is it still wet? Yep, so now I'm going to do the 6 points of contact again. Don't let your finger dig in like I just did. And now I can't, because it's getting narrow, I can't actually get 6 points, so now it's just your fingertips. And every time you narrow it, it will thicken a bit. That's where I dug my fingernail in, just there. Okay, so I'm just going to pull up a little bit there. It's still a little bit. Here's another trick which I don't do unless, remember, trying to get flowers in these. So using the stick, you can actually get it even narrower because your finger's too thick to go in there now. You can actually, using the stick, just kind of, whatever way you can do it, you can narrow it around the stick. See, I got it almost, it's very narrow at that point there. So that's another way you can get it even narrower. And we have another bottle. I'm going to do some simple decoration on these just to catch the glaze. They're very sort of quiet forms, so I thought it'd be nice to do just a little something. Let's get you down low so you can see. Okay, so a long time ago I saw an exhibition by a lady called Lucy Ree, and this was back in the 1980s, I think. And she did some very narrow forms, and they just had a little sgraffito line on them. And ever since I saw that show, I've also, when I do anything like this, I love doing the little lines. So it's just using a tiny little loop tool. You can just see it there. And just, you know, carve into the clay. And they've got to be very gentle because these are dry. They dry very fast on the neck, but the body is still quite soft. So it's just a simple line, just to say hello, I'm here, without, you know, ruining this very quiet, peaceful looking shape of a bottle. But if I use a glaze that has a sort of transparent kind of quality with a bit of color in it, I think these will look really pretty. And you got to be careful for that last little. Make sure you get them Hi again. This is the day after, and I think they made a movie called that. Anyway, the bottles are now dry on the top completely, and the bottoms are still a little sort of leather hard. So the bottom is what I'm trimming anyway. And I made a variety of sizes ranging from really squat, and this one's still pretty soft at the bottom, to very tall and thin, because I want to do a really nice display of these in the showroom. So I'm going to trim them all now. And this is where I threw a chuck, so it's very wide there, and it's narrow down there. So all of these will fit on this chuck. This was just throwing without a bottom, like a coffee mug. So let's get going and show you, when you're throwing bottles, it's a good idea to make a chuck at the same time. So, and you can seal this down. You don't need a Giffing grip for this. You seal this down on the wheel head, and basically then put your bottles in this. But it's important to have two. Look at this. As soon as I start talking, Poubelle has to come over. Are you going to break pieces, Poubelle? Poubelle. So I'm just basically refining this until I feel like my tallest form that I have here needs to be able to fit in here without the neck touching the bottom. So that looks pretty darn good. So that's all I had to do to this piece. I think, let's just measure that. You could do this by just measuring like that and seeing how far down it goes. And it goes there. I could probably trim a little more off, actually. It's nice to have as big a area as possible touching the... And I'm giving myself a nice round shape to give as much contact to the piece as possible. Let's try it again. There we go. So this works pretty good. Now you can also, when you're trimming, you've got to decide on your level of sort of security. You can fasten this to here with soft clay as well. But you're just trying to basically just adjust it a little bit until it feels centered. Pretty good. So then it's just like using my trimming tool. And this takes a bit longer when you have to do things like this, of course. So it depends on your timing. If these were a little softer, maybe they wouldn't move as much. There we go, let's put that so I can save that. See if that's any better. So it's a good learning experience for me too. The more pressure I push down, the less chance you'd have movement anyway. But because of this, the foot is kind of thinner at the bottom there. I'm pushing it in, make it concave. So I lessened my pressure a little bit, and that's when it started moving. So let's give myself a nice little foot there. Of course, you could sponge these off if you're not worried about the form as much. You could sponge them off and basically you wouldn't even have to trim. These are pretty elegant bud vases. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I've got a little sgraffito on these. Oh, and here's the other thing you can do. I've shown you this before. Using these metal ribs, they get worn out. You can trim with these. I've got different areas that I've used on these, and these give you a nice, especially if the clay is getting just about beyond leather hard. The trimmings, of course, will just fall right off. So these ribs, even if you scratch them, do something to the end so you don't really feel like you can use them anymore as nice ribs because they leave a scratch mark in every piece of clay you use it on, you can start using them as trimming devices. There you go, I'll do that so you can see. See how the clay's coming off? And it gives you that really nice, large area that's the same kind of, you know, there's no, the trimming line leaves you almost like grooves. This doesn't. Okay, so then finish up the bottom. It's a beautiful day outside today. I'm going to try and go on a bike ride, but it's cold still. I'm trying to keep my videos down. Used to try for 15-20 minutes, then I went to half an hour, and now I got some of them getting up to an hour long almost. Some pretty much should come with a warning that you need a bag of popcorn. Okay, so that's this one. See if we can lift that out easily. And of course where's my brush? I did sgraffito on this one at the top. So we could actually do more. There you go. It's a nice bottle. It's a bit big for a bud vase, but it's meant for a rose just sticking out. I feel like that has a look to a Scandinavian look, really. So. Okay, so there we go. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, a little bit of debris in the trimming there. That is light. Yeah, that doesn't have any extra weight on it. All right, but it's a nice little easier bud vase. And it's wide enough so you could get quite a few pansies in there or something. Okay, I've got a lot to trim. Okay, I think as a modification to this, because some of them were moving, I just put this clay, it's softer clay there, and I just wet the chuck and then wet the clay a little bit and stuck it on there. So I have a little soft edge to the chuck, and now my bottle that I'm trimming, I can sit down in there. Let's make sure it's centered. Yep. And so that, now because that will stick to the clay bottle and it's stuck to the chuck as well, and that will stop the actual wobbling. So, because that was becoming a little bit, I left them a bit too long. I think they've got a bit drier than I wanted them to be. Oh, this one's, having said that, this one's softer. But anyway, that helps with the chuck to make it, it's funny because when I do this on bisqueware, I stick the clay to the chuck and then put it works fine. But anyway, the piece is, the chuck is actually greenware too. It hasn't been bisque fired yet. But now it's not moving, I'm not putting pressure on from the downward thing. My fingers are just guiding it a little bit. So take my hand off completely. And stop before you go to, and now it's really stuck in there, so I've got to give it some persuasion to get it out, because the clay, because I wet it, is stuck to the form. Yeah, not too bad. It's white clay on, this is B-mix I threw these out of, and that other clay is a white stoneware. So it's not, and it's light, very light. Okay, so in other words, just put some clay, wet the chuck, put some clay on the chuck, so that sticks to the chuck, and then basically wet the edge of the clay before you stick your piece upside down on it, and that's sort of solved that problem. Okay, this is a very simple bud vase. I've shown quite a lot of these different, more advanced ones, but I thought I'd better show another very easy one for beginners. So this is about half a pound of clay, which is about 225 grams if I remember correctly. So we're centering in the normal way. So when you feel like you got it in center, let go slowly. Put it in your hole, feel for the center, and then go down and pull out to your left hand, not far though, just a little bit, about 2 centimeters to an inch across, I guess, in the inside. So it's opened, now we move to this side. Push in. Your inside fingers are going to be right at the bottom on the inside, and your outside fingers are a bit below. So you're going to push in with the outside fingers and bring them up immediately, and follow with your inside fingers. They'll basically just a bit above. So outside fingers are a bit lower down. I confused that there. So basically, inside fingers are touching the floor, outside fingers are touching the back, which means they're lower down, and you push in with the outside fingers and pull through the wall with the inside fingers a touch higher. So the last thing that touches is the outside fingers on any level. So it stays narrow. Dribble right on the rim so it's inside and outside. Now you're almost not going to be able to reach the bottom. Nope, I can't. So I'm pushing with the outside fingers just a touch, pushing out with the inside fingers, so now it makes a belly. And let go with the inside fingers and press with the outside fingers, and then come back in, and you have what's called a bud vase. So that's the simplest, and you can refine this now. It's already what you need, except for I think the top's a bit wide. So reach as far down as you can on the inside and push out again with the inside finger. I've only got my middle finger touching at the moment on the inside. And when you get to the point where it's already wide, you start pressing with the outside fingers too. The inside finger pushes back a little bit, so it means the wall height will grow because I'm pressing the fingers together. And you get to the top again. Touch the top with your finger to compress a little bit there. Now we dry out the inside. We'll look at the size of that sponge. Squish it down a little bit. And then I'm dragging it up so I've got the water out of the piece. And there's a little bit left in there. Let's use the other sponge. Oh, I got one here that's narrower. There's a little bit left in there, so with that I can reach the bottom again. That's it, dry now. Okay, so we have a piece now. This is in the part I just taught with collaring, but as many points of contact as you can make. You put pressure on the neck there, and come to the top. Same again, as many points of contact as you can make. And you can use the back of your fingers too. I often use two fingers with a middle finger in the center there, so it's getting dry now. So wet it again. As many as you can get. But you have to come up straight away so you don't actually stay on the same level more than one rotation. Now I'm going to do 4 points of contact because it's getting so narrow that that's probably enough. And up again. Same again, as long as it's wet. Come up. Now it's drying out a little bit, so I'm going to add a bit of water. H2O. Same again. Up to the top. How many flowers do we want in this thing, basically? Because your neck can be thin for one flower or a bit wider. But it should retain the flowers so they don't just flop over the plant, the actual vase. Okay, so then straighten up the bottom. Take a little bit off. As long as you can take as much of this off as you can, actually, before it starts to wobble. And then using the metal rib, we'll get the water off. And this is the time to play. You can use the rib to actually change its shape a little bit by pressing in down there, or I can lift it up here and give it a shoulder by hitting with the corner of the rib to create like a heavy hard edge right there. You can do the same up at the top there, press the corner of the rib in. It's got that little hard edge right at the corner there. Right there, there's like it changes direction. So it's a good thing to use for giving yourself some hard edges. I've got another one there, so I've touched it several times there to give it a little bit of a corner to catch some glaze and give it a bit of interest. And then you've got to clean it up. This is what everybody would think of as just a little tiny dining room table, but vase. Alrighty, so let's lift him off. There you go, give you a better angle at it. Just a baby bud vase.